Hey there, and welcome to another video on my channel. This channel is still very much in the early stages, but I have noticed in editing several of the videos that are being released this month that a lot of the video quality is washed out, or most noticeably extremely orange, which this one is as well a little bit. This is something that I'm fixing. I didn't know a lot about videography when I first started. I also didn't know exactly how everything was going to look, not only when I was editing the video, but also when it was uploaded to YouTube. So a lot of that has become apparent now, and I'm making some changes. As you can see, there are already a lot of changes to the way the video looks right now. There are, however, going to still be some videos with that washed out look because I recorded quite a few videos in advance. The norm is going to be a little something more like this and what you're seeing now, and I think that looks a little cleaner, a little less messy, and a little easier to look at. It's also going to be a lot easier for me to edit and color grade when I have an environment like this instead of one that features a lot of colored lighting. So because several videos were recorded in advance, many of them as early as August, you're still going to see a few of those poorly graded videos that look a little washed out. Those videos are still in 4K, but they look washed out because my colors are not as crisp as they should be. Hopefully that is something that is going to be fixed in the videos moving forward. That's going to include this one because I'm recording this video after I learned all of that and started seeing some of the impact on the other content that I had. I am recording this review of The Fires of Vengeance in late September, which is when I have started making some of these changes to my lighting and my videography. You can expect most of the videos that are released in November and onward to be a lot more like this, look a lot nicer, and be just generally easier to look at than several of the videos that are going to be released through October. I'm sorry so many of October's videos are going to be more of a challenge to look at, but I promise it is something that I have been working on fixing and will continue to improve on in the future. So, that disclaimer out of the way, let's move on to the review. Hello, I'm TL Bainter, and this is my YouTube channel where I review books and give writing or Dungeons & Dragons advice, as the case may be right now, and I also just release some personal vlogs on occasion. Today I am releasing my second book review, which is going to be for the sequel to the previous book review I did, which was for Rage of Dragons. Rage of Dragons is a book that I greatly enjoyed, and I've even recommended it to a lot of people. In fact, it is on loan right now, so you will notice it missing from my shelf. If the fact that I have the second book on the shelf but not the first one is something that will stress you out, I guess let me know and I will do my best to make it up to you. Immediately after I finished The Rage of Dragons, I went and picked up The Fires of Vengeance off the shelf because I really wanted to just continue the story. And the story of The Fires of Vengeance picks up right where The Rage of Dragons left off. As a note, I try to keep all the reviews on my channel spoiler free so that you can go and watch the review and get an idea of whether or not this is a book you should pick up. If you're looking for a review that is more in-depth and a critique that dives deeper into the story itself and gives away many spoilers, this probably isn't the one for you. But if you just want my overall thoughts on the book and whether or not I would recommend it and the star rating that I'm going to give it at the end, then you've come to the right place. That being said, there is a chance that things from the first book are going to be spoiled for you because this is the second book in a series. Based on this review, you might be able to infer things like which characters are still alive because I'm talking about them in this, so they probably survive whatever happens in book one. And at least for me, that's not really something that I want to know. I want to always be concerned for my characters and not have somebody's review in the back of my mind telling me, well, no matter what happens, this character survives because the reviewer that you watched talked about the character in the next book as if they were still alive. So that's just something to keep in mind. With all of that said, let's dive into my review of The Fires of Vengeance. The Fires of Vengeance picks up immediately following The Rage of Dragons. We are still feeling the effects of Rage's aftermath, and we are also still feeling Tao's desire for vengeance that drives him forward. He has not exacted vengeance on all of his targets and is seeking to do so still and very actively, and that is continuing to be what drives him forward. It's not what drives the plot forward as much anymore, though. The plot becomes a lot bigger than Tao and his wants and his needs, and we begin to feel as though his own quest for vengeance is becoming a bit childish and he is losing perspective. In this book, Tao has a new title and new swords under his belt, and he is assisting the queen with eliminating her enemies and securing the throne that is rightfully hers. So the first thing I want to talk about is the presentation of the book. The Fires of Vengeance is, much like The Rage of Dragons, beautiful inside and out. In fact, I'd even say that I like this cover a little bit more than The Rage of Dragons cover. I like the coloring on it, and just the dragon design on the front is pretty awesome. The interior of the book as well is just excellently done once again. Same kind of formatting, same basic breakdown of the chapters and sections. One thing I will note is that much like the first book, we did not get a pronunciation guide in this one, which again is something that would be really helpful. I tried to find a pronunciation guide online, but I wasn't able to find one. Thankfully, I listened to the audiobook as a companion to this one, and that turned out to be an excellent idea. The narrator for the audiobook was fantastic, and I really enjoyed his work. I learned how to pronounce all of the names correctly. I had most of them correct, which was nice. There were only a few that I was consistently pronouncing incorrectly before, and I got that fixed after listening to the audiobook. I listened to it while I read, and I feel like that really helped me to absorb a lot of the material in this book. Overall, the presentation, I'm going to give The Fires of Vengeance 4 stars, just like I gave Rage of Dragons. The cover and everything is beautiful, the interior is fantastic, but the lack of a pronunciation guide in a book that I believe really needs one, especially when we have so many books that get pronunciation guides when we don't need them. I know how to pronounce the word Jeff. I'm going to give it 4 stars, which is really not bad. I love this book, and I think it looks great on my shelf. The Rage of Dragons was a very plot-driven book. It was focused on one thing, and really one thing only. There were a couple of side things here that you could tell were being set up for the second book, but mostly this was just Tao's story and his pursuit of vengeance. However, this book gives me more of what I really wanted from the first one and becomes a lot more character-driven. The plot is still moving forward, and there is still a really strong plot that I greatly enjoyed here, but we get a lot more time spent with the characters and developing them, growing them, and getting to know them. This is what I wanted out of The Fires of Vengeance. I really wanted a lot more time with the characters, and I wanted something that was more focused on them so that I could get to know them and fall in love with them. I'm going to talk more about what that means when I get to my review of the characters later on in this review. This is a book in which we see Tao starting to learn that he needs to curtail his vengeance and his roguish attitude, his me against everybody else approach to things in order to achieve his goal of vengeance. Even though he really wants to exact that vengeance, and that is still what drives him, he is being forced to learn that he can't just go gung-ho and head first in every situation and expect to come out on top. He's having to listen to other people and respect their strengths and their intelligence in order to get what he wants. We're seeing a little bit of growth in him as a result of that. There are also a lot of ramifications for his failures here, and they affect more than just him. We saw that a bit in the first book, in which he would occasionally abandon his sword brothers, and that would result in very negative consequences for them and for their team as a whole. And we're still seeing that here, but it feels like Tao is beginning to realize that all of his actions have consequences beyond himself and can affect the people that he is supposed to care about, and that I believe he does care about, even if he's not great about showing it, and even if he tries his best not to show it. The plot in this book, in my opinion, really takes a backseat to the characters, which is not a bad thing and is, like I said, what I wanted, but it sometimes takes too much of a backseat, and I feel like we didn't accomplish a great deal in it. Yes, at the end a lot had happened, but it feels like something more could have happened in this book than what did. It kind of felt like there were some skips of content that I personally didn't feel were necessary. I really would have liked to see some of the things that we skipped over. I would have liked a bit more of a slowed, reflective period at some points, but instead we got a lot of rushes and speed throughs of certain things that I would have liked to see. I don't have an issue with this, and I understand why it had to be done. It keeps the book at roughly the same length as the first one, just a little bit longer. I think it keeps it at about 20 or 30 pages longer than the first one. I'm not totally certain. But in terms of plot progression, it didn't move forward nearly as much as the first book did, which, as I said previously, is what I wanted. I wanted something that was more character driven. I just feel like we could have gotten more plot out of this book and more progression out of it than we did. We also start the book off with a "As You Know, Bob" sequence that lasts several pages, where we are just recapping the entirety of the first book, and I understand why it happened, and I understand that hearing this from the character's perspective that we do was really important because we needed to get inside this character's head and needed to know how this character feels about the events as they are being relayed back to him. So I understand why it happened and why it had to happen. It was just something that I skimmed through fairly quickly and picked up on the important things that I needed to know and just moved on. I feel like the recap wasn't totally necessary and there was probably another way this could have been done, but I also understand that maybe it had been several years since people had read the first book and so they wanted a recap. I don't know, it's just something that's not really my preference, but I'm not gonna dock any significant points from it. Overall, the plot for this book was pretty good. I enjoyed the plot for The Rage of Dragons more than I did for The Fires of Vengeance, but that's also to be expected with a book that's becoming more character-driven than plot-driven, like the first one was. Overall, the plot line for this was pretty average in my opinion, and so because 3 stars is average for me, I'm going to give the plot line for The Fires of Vengeance 3 stars. This isn't to say that I did not enjoy this plot, I really did, but it was just pretty average to me, particularly compared to what we got in book 1. Now I want to talk about the world. The world in The Fires of Vengeance opens up to us a lot more than what we saw in book 1. And you'll probably remember from my previous review that I really liked what we saw of the world, but I wanted to see more of it, and we definitely get that here. Not only do we get to see more of the world through Tao's eyes, but we also get to learn about the history of the world, and a lot more is explained to us, and we get just a massive truckload of information. And it is delivered to us fairly well. I'll get to that in the next section. But the world itself, as we are learning more and more about its history and the richness of it, and we are seeing more of these places in Evan Winter's world that are going to be more and more relevant as time goes on, and we learn more about things like Isihogo and the demons, it's really expanding considerably, and I greatly appreciated that. I'm really enjoying what we are getting here, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of it and exploring more of it in detail. I really love this world at this point. I also really am enjoying the magic system, which is being expanded on a little bit. We're getting more insight into how it works. Ultimately, the world is easily going to get 5 stars from me. I am really stoked to see more of this world and watch it continue to be fleshed out, as well as just get to continue experiencing it. Because Tao isn't so focused on himself in The Fires of Vengeance as he was in The Rage of Dragons, we get to see more of the world. He's not caring solely about himself, he's wanting to learn more about the history of the world and how things came to be what they are. And this really helped us as the readers also start getting a lot of that information. And we learned a lot about the history of the world and its people here. I loved it. And a lot of what we learned really calls back to some things in the first book that some of which I had kind of guessed, others I had no idea, and it was just really well pulled together. I am going to give the world 5 stars, hands down. Easily 5 stars. I cannot wait for more content in this world. So I enjoyed the world itself, but how did I feel about the world building? You've probably already guessed, based on what I just said about the world itself, that we get a lot of information dumps in The Fires of Vengeance, particularly compared to what we got in The Rage of Dragons. But were those information dumps done properly and well? Was it all executed well and properly? Or was it done in an expository manner, like a scene that I mentioned in my review of the first book? We do get several scenes of exposition in this book, but it wasn't nearly as unnatural as some of the scenes that I mentioned in book 1. All of the information that is given to our main character, and thus to us, is information he doesn't already have, and it's information that he actively goes out and asks for. Some of it is done in the form of lessons, which I feel like doing lessons to teach some of these things is a little bit cheap and an easy way out, but it works and it makes sense, and it also gives us a couple of interesting character moments to develop a couple of characters and their relationship to one another. The delivery of the information also feels more natural and less forced than some of the information that we were given in the first book. Again, I don't want to just dog on the way that we were given that information in the first book. There were just 1 or 2 scenes that didn't really sit well with me and felt very much like just massive amounts of exposition. However, despite those lesson scenes, the vast majority of the world building in The Fires of Vengeance isn't done in scenes like that. It's done through being shown rather than told. We get many moments of Tao just moving through the world and talking to people and interacting with them and seeing things with his own eyes or overhearing them. We get interactions with different characters that help kind of expand this world and the setting We get Tao's own inner thoughts and his concerns and his thoughts and worries that also give us a little more insight into this world and how not only he feels about it, but probably how we should be feeling about some of the injustices that are taking place. All in all, there wasn't anything in the second book that took me out of the story during an exposition period like it did in the first book. All of it felt very natural and like things the characters would actually say or do in order to get this information and thus give the information back to me, the reader. Evan Winter did a great job from beginning to end with the world building in this book, particularly compared to some of the issues I had with book 1. So I'm going to give it a 5-star review as well. The world building here was 5 stars, just like the world itself. My main gripe with book 1 was that there just wasn't a lot of character growth outside of Tao, and that the characters around him seemed interesting and like people I wanted to explore, but we didn't really get to explore them. They clearly had personalities and unique traits that were all going to define them later on, or were meant to define them in the first book, but didn't really because they weren't thoroughly explored and executed. But this book does exactly what I want, and it gave me the opportunity to dive into these characters and learn more about them and get to know them as individuals and see their strengths and their weaknesses and how they fit into the group, rather than just being backdrops for Tao and his quest for vengeance. They all really stood out in this book, and I was able to pick favorites beyond just Tao, because Tao is my only favorite in the first book since he's the one who really got fleshed out. The Fires of Vengeance gives all of these characters purposes and personalities and interesting traits, strengths, and weaknesses that help each of them stand out on their own. They all have their own unique goals and wants. They all have histories, some of which we get to explore and some of which I feel we're going to explore in the future. This is also hinted at in the first book, particularly when it comes to lineage of some of these characters, and I really look forward to seeing some of that explored in more detail if we get it. If we don't, I'll be fine with that too, but I would like to see lineage of some of these characters be discussed as well. We also get a few pages written from the perspectives of people who are not Tao in this book. We got a little bit of that in the first book as well, but we get more of it in this book, and it becomes more important in this book. We get a lot of insight into a few key characters, including people that are Tao's enemies and the Queen's enemies, and that really helps to humanize them and make us understand them a little bit more. It makes their stories more tragic than just this person is evil and they have to die. We also get a few chapters from the perspectives of a couple of Tao's friends, or at least one of them, and this really helps to shape the relationship between Tao and these other characters. It also helped to be able to see Tao from the perspectives of others. As we read through these books, primarily from Tao's perspective, we get a lot of empathy for him, but other characters around him will see his darker side and his demonic nature, and we get to see what they think of Tao and how they perceive him, what it looks like to be an outsider rather than somebody who is Tao himself doing all of these things. This helped us get a more well-rounded view of Tao as a person and as a character, rather than just seeing how Tao sees himself and us as the reader having to infer what it really looks like and what's really going on. I don't want to rant too long about the characters, although this is probably going to be the longest section of my review, but another thing I want to touch on is that Evan Winter is a master of character motivations. Many of his characters had unique motivations that stood out from one another and weren't simple, I want to kill the bad guy because I'm a good guy. There was a lot of complexity and depth to these people, and I'm really excited to see more about these motivations and see where they take us. Tao was excellently motivated, and his motivations made sense, as did his progression. Now we get to see other characters who have motivations of their own and desires of their own and are pursuing their own quests. Some of them quests that are counter to Tao's, or even just directly against him, and they are trying to get to Tao and hurt him, and we understand why. All of the character motivations in this book were really well done and made sense, and I was able to even predict what some of the actions of the characters would be based on what I know their end goal is. Without a doubt in my mind, I'm going to give the characters of the Fires of Vengeance 5 stars easily. The characters in this book were just so excellently written and well explored. Like I said in my first review, I wanted more depth to these characters. I wanted to know more about them, and I wanted to start caring about them more than I did before, and Evan Winter absolutely gave me that with this second book. This second book really explores these characters to a degree that the first one didn't even come close to. Unlike scratching the surface, which is what we had in The Rage of Dragons, we really get to understand these characters and get to know them and spend time with them in things that don't just move the plot forward, but that also just give us some insight into them. There's a lot of great dialogue and quips and fun moments that help you bond with the characters just as Tao is bonding with them as well. As for favorites, I'm going to say Hadith is my favorite character in this book. Uduak, probably second. Pidith is clever, snarky, and sensible. In my opinion, he's as well written and well thought out as Tao is. So now I want to talk about the writing in The Fires of Vengeance. Evan Winter's writing in The Rage of Dragons is something that I praised highly, and in The Fires of Vengeance, that is even more true. I didn't know that his writing could improve so much, but it did improve quite a bit in this book. This is especially prevalent in his combat scenes. Whenever there's a combat scene, Evan Winter delivers some of the greatest prose that I have seen from any author writing a combat scene, but especially from newer authors. His battles, whether they are one-on-one duels or clashes of warring forces, groups of people who are just 5 or thousands, all of these battles are incredible. You have a great sense of space and stakes and the key players that are present. There are moments in this book where you are flashing between 2 different battles, and it isn't jarring or disorienting, which I think is pretty challenging to pull off, but he manages to do it. And some of those scenes were just incredible, and they blew me away, and I felt tense and my heart was beating into my throat. He did an incredible job with the battles in this book. I really enjoyed them in the first book, especially the duels, but in this book, he just killed it. It was amazing. It's not just about the combat though. His writing throughout the book is just incredible. I love his dialogue as well and the way that he builds his characters through it. I know I already praised the characters, so I'm just gonna keep this short, but his dialogue and the way that the dialogue makes it easy to tell which character is which. Even without a dialogue tag, I would be able to tell you which character is speaking just based on what they said and how they said it. Each of them has a unique way of talking, and I know this character is saying this because they used this kind of language or this approach to it, or this person had this snarky quip, so it's probably Hadith. I loved all of it, all of the writing. Descriptions, dialogue, combat, everything in this book was written absolutely incredibly, and I'm going to give it 5 stars. The writing for The Fires of Vengeance easily gets 5 stars from me. The pacing of The Fires of Vengeance was, much like the rest of the book, a great improvement on what we saw in the first book. The first book really struggled getting off the ground and took its time to start the plot. Some people found it a challenge and couldn't get past the first quarter of the book because it felt like it started off too slowly. This book almost has the opposite problem, where it starts off like a rocket and it just keeps going and going, and occasionally you get breaks and rest periods, but for the most part you were just shooting forward, and there's always something that is driving you to the next step. In fact, for almost the first half of the book, it felt characters aren't even sleeping, or if they are, it's for like 30 or 40 minute winks because there's so much going on. And I felt like that was a pretty good analogy for how I felt as a reader as well. It was just going and going with no rest until a character finally had to just pass out in order to give himself and me, the reader, a break just for a minute. That brief respite was absolutely necessary, and we get that a few times, but for the most part, this book just keeps going, and the pacing is just a tide that sweeps you along throughout this book. Evan Winter did a pretty good job of giving us the respite that we needed on occasion. We would get some rest every now and then, but that rest was always kept brief in comparison to the long periods of just intense storytelling and plot development and character development just rocketing forward. Battles and horrors and all of this, it was intense. I have a feeling that the ferocity of the ride that we are being taken on in this series is only going to become more intense with the third book, because things are set up in the second book for an even more challenging and aggressive story for book 3. Overall, I loved the pacing of this book. It kept me along and occasionally gave me a little bit of breathing room so that I could calm down a bit before we move on to the next intense series of action sequences and character moments and all of this. It was well done. Once again, this is another attribute of the book that is going to get 5 stars from me. I fully expected to enjoy The Fires of Vengeance because I enjoyed The Rage of Dragons so much. However, I had a bit of concern that we were going to get into a second book slump, which is generally when the second book in a series just isn't as good as the first one, but then the third one kind of picks up typically. But instead, all I've gotten is a stark improvement on the first book and the things within it. All of my complaints about the first book were addressed. We got a ton of incredible character moments and development. We got a better understanding of the world and its magic systems, and we also got it through forms that were not just exposition dumps that were completely needless to the character and were exclusively for the reader. There were just massive improvements in everything in this book, from the characters to the writing to the world itself. This book focused on resolving some things that were left over from the first book, while also setting the stage for books 3 and 4. I believe he said this is going to be a 4-book series. He's also told us that book 3 is one that he's really excited about, and I cannot wait to read it. The title of it alone, The Lord of Demons, is just... oh, I'm so excited. Based on the title of the book, The Lord of Demons, I have a feeling book 3 is going to be absolutely incredible and intense, even more so than this one was. And we got some moments in book 2 that I think we're going to get a lot more of in the following ones, but I don't want to get into spoilers, but this is getting really good and really interesting. I know that pretty much everybody on booktube calls everything interesting, but I promise you, what Evan Winter is setting up here is incredibly fascinating. Again, the only problem that I've really mentioned here, and it's not even that big of a deal, is just that the plot is not quite as thorough and impactful as it was in book 1, but this wasn't really a plot-focused book. This was a lot more about resolving some things from the first book and getting to know the characters and falling in love with them further. It absolutely achieved that goal, and as far as I'm concerned, The Fires of Vengeance easily gets a 5-star rating for me. Fires of Vengeance, the second review on this channel, and I'm a pretty critical person, and it's a 5-star book. I am so stoked for books 3 and 4 in the Burning series. As soon as pre-orders go live for Lord of Demons, I'm putting in that pre-order. Well, there you have it, my thoughts on Evan Winter's second book in the Burning series, The Fires of Vengeance. I had a feeling I was going to like it just because I enjoyed the first one, but I didn't realize I would like it as much as I did. I certainly didn't expect that I would already have a 5-star review out there, but there you have it, Fires of Vengeance, 5 stars. This book is just rich with content and characters. The world is amazing, the magic system is getting really unique, and I'm fascinated by it, and I can't wait to see more of what Evan Winter has in store. I'm curious to know what you think of my review of The Fires of Vengeance, particularly if you are someone who has read the book. I don't really know what I think of your thoughts if you haven't read this book. But if you have read The Fires of Vengeance, do you agree with my rating? Did you enjoy Fires of Vengeance more than the first book like I did? Or is the first book the one that continues to be highest on the pedestal for you? If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel and liking this video, leaving a comment. All of that definitely helps me out as I work to grow this channel. You can also find me on most social media platforms as @TLBainter, and I'll have those links in the description as well. I am most active on Instagram, but I am present on most platforms: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I think that's most platforms. Are there others I'm supposed to be part of? Anyway, thank you so much for taking the time to check out this review. I really appreciate it and really appreciate you sticking around. Until next time, bye.